My name is Emily, and at 22, I never thought I'd be sleeping in a storage unit while working 3 part-time jobs just to afford community college. The inheritance my mother left for my education had mysteriously vanished while my stepfather and his son lived in luxury. Then my successful Aunt Margaret found me restocking shelves at a grocery store at midnight, looking exhausted and malnourished. Her discovery changed my entire world. Before I tell you how one conversation transformed my life from desperation to hope, let me share how I ended up in such an impossible situation. I grew up in a charming 2-story house in suburban Portland, Oregon. My childhood was filled with warmth, creativity, and unconditional love. My mother, Sarah, was a talented graphic designer who worked from home, turning our spare bedroom into a vibrant studio filled with art supplies and half-finished projects. She had this amazing ability to find beauty in everything and taught me to see the world through an artist's eyes. Mom and I were incredibly close. Every Saturday morning, we would explore different neighborhoods, photographing interesting architecture and street art for her design inspiration. She would pack us elaborate picnics, complete with homemade sandwiches cut into fun shapes and thermoses of hot chocolate, even in summer. Those adventures became our special tradition, just the two of us discovering hidden gems around the city. Our house reflected Mom's artistic sensibility, with colorful paintings covering the walls and plants filling every windowsill. My bedroom was painted a soft mint green with white furniture Mom had refinished herself. She helped me create a reading nook under the window, complete with cushions she had sewn by hand. Every corner of our home told a story and held memories. Mom was incredibly organized about finances, having learned responsibility early after her own parents died when she was young. She had established a substantial education fund for me when I was born, adding to it religiously every month. Sometimes, she would show me the statements, explaining how compound interest worked and emphasizing the importance of planning for the future. "Education is the greatest gift I can give you, sweetheart," she would say. "This money will ensure you can pursue whatever career makes you happy without worrying about debt." She dreamed of me attending art school or studying business, whatever path called to me. Being the first in our small family to attend a 4-year university was her greatest aspiration for my future. Everything changed when I was 14. Mom began experiencing severe headaches and periods of confusion. After weeks of tests and doctor visits, the diagnosis came: early-onset Alzheimer's disease, an exceptionally rare and aggressive form that strikes people in their 30s. The doctors gave her perhaps 3 years before the disease would progress to its final stages. Those 3 years were simultaneously the most precious and most heartbreaking of my life. I watched my vibrant, creative mother slowly fade away, forgetting words, then faces, then entire decades of her life. The medical expenses mounted quickly, despite insurance coverage. Experimental treatments, specialized care, and constant medical supervision drained our finances rapidly. By the time I was 17, Mom required full-time care. She no longer recognized me consistently, though she had moments of clarity that were both wonderful and devastating. During one lucid afternoon, she pressed a manila envelope into my hands. "For your education," she whispered, her eyes briefly focusing with their old intensity. "Promise me you'll use this to build a beautiful life." Inside was documentation for the education fund, now worth over $150,000, along with insurance papers and a will naming me as her sole beneficiary. She had also included a letter, written during her early diagnosis, explaining her hopes for my future and her love for me. I treasured that letter, reading it whenever the weight of caring for her became overwhelming. Mom passed away peacefully, on a rainy April morning during my senior year of high school. I was holding her hand when her breathing simply stopped, her face finally peaceful after months of confusion and fear. The funeral was small but beautiful, filled with her artistic colleagues and the few neighbors who had remained supportive throughout her illness. After the funeral, I faced the reality of being completely alone at 17. Mom's life insurance covered the remaining medical debts and funeral expenses, but barely. The house, which had a substantial mortgage, would need to be sold eventually. For the immediate future, I could continue living there alone, but the isolation was overwhelming. That's when Robert entered my life. He had been Mom's hospice social worker during her final months, a calm and seemingly compassionate man in his early 40s. Robert had been exceptionally kind during Mom's care, often staying late to help with paperwork or simply to provide emotional support. He had a gentle manner and spoke knowledgeably about grief and healing. About 2 months after Mom died, Robert began visiting more frequently, ostensibly to check on my well-being and help with the transition. He would bring groceries, help with household repairs, and listen patiently as I talked about missing Mom. His presence provided comfort during the darkest period of my grief. "You shouldn't be alone right now," he would say. "Sarah would want someone looking out for you." Gradually, his visits became daily occurrences. Then he began staying overnight in the guest room when I had nightmares or panic attacks. His care felt genuinely motivated by concern for my welfare. Robert had a son, Marcus, from a previous marriage. Marcus was 19, 2 years older than me, and studying business at a local community college while living with his mother across town. When Robert introduced us, Marcus seemed polite but distant, clearly uninterested in his father's involvement with his former client's grieving daughter. 6 months after Mom's death, Robert proposed marriage. The suggestion shocked me initially, but he presented it practically rather than romantically. "You need stability and family," he explained. "I care about you deeply, and marriage would provide legal protections and financial security. We can take things slowly, but you need someone official looking out for your interests." At 17, overwhelmed by grief and terrified of facing adulthood alone, his proposal seemed like salvation. Robert promised to preserve Mom's house, protect my education fund, and provide the family structure I desperately needed. The marriage would be more of a guardianship, he assured me, giving me time to grieve and mature without the pressure of immediate independence. We married in a small civil ceremony 3 weeks before my 18th birthday. I wore Mom's pearl earrings and a simple dress I bought specifically for the occasion. Marcus attended reluctantly, his expression clearly indicating his disapproval of the entire arrangement. Robert's ex-wife was notably absent, and I learned later that she had strongly opposed the marriage. The early months of marriage were relatively peaceful. Robert maintained appropriate boundaries, giving me space to grieve while handling household responsibilities and paperwork. Marcus moved in with us to save money on housing, taking over the spare room Mom had used as her studio. The transition seemed manageable, even positive at times. Robert was knowledgeable about financial matters and offered to help manage my inheritance and education fund. He explained investment strategies and suggested we consolidate my assets for better management. Trusting his expertise and grateful for his guidance, I signed papers giving him power of attorney over my finances until I turned 25, a decision that seemed reasonable for someone just learning to handle money independently. The changes began subtly. Robert started making comments about the house being inefficiently arranged. Mom's artwork was gradually moved to storage, replaced with Robert's more conventional decorations. The colorful, creative atmosphere Mom had cultivated was slowly neutralized, becoming more sterile and impersonal. Marcus's attitude toward me shifted from indifference to mild hostility. He would criticize my cooking, question my study habits, and make sarcastic comments about my dependence on his father. "She's basically a charity case," I once overheard him tell a friend on the phone. "Dad feels guilty about her mom, so now we're stuck with her." When I expressed interest in attending Portland State University's art program, both Robert and Marcus discouraged the idea. "Art school is impractical," Robert said. "You need marketable skills. Business or accounting would provide better career stability." Marcus agreed, adding that creative fields were for people who don't need to worry about paying bills. Despite my protests, they wore down my resistance with persistent arguments about practicality and financial responsibility. Eventually, I enrolled in business classes at the local community college, postponing my university plans while living at home. The compromise felt reasonable, though it meant abandoning the artistic path Mom had always encouraged. My education fund, now under Robert's management, was supposedly being invested for maximum growth. He provided periodic statements showing steady increases, praising his investment strategies. I trusted his expertise completely, focused on my studies and adjusting to family life, rather than scrutinizing financial details. During my second year of community college, I noticed changes in our household expenses. Marcus received a new truck for his 21st birthday, an expensive vehicle Robert justified as necessary for Marcus's job search. The house underwent renovations, including a complete kitchen remodel and new furniture throughout. Robert explained. These improvements as investments in our property value. When I asked about accessing my education fund to transfer to a 4-year university, Robert expressed concern about the timing. The investments are doing well, but liquidating now would result in significant penalties, he explained. Another year of growth would maximize your educational resources. Community college is providing excellent preparation, and patience will pay dividends. His explanation sounded reasonable, and I respected his financial expertise. Marcus supported his father's recommendations, emphasizing the value of practical experience over rushing into expensive university programs. Their united front made questioning their judgment seem ungrateful and immature. The dynamics at home continued deteriorating gradually. Robert became more controlling about my daily activities, questioning my friendships and monitoring my schedule closely. He insisted on approving my work schedule, limiting my hours to ensure adequate time for household responsibilities. Marcus treated me increasingly like hired help, expecting me to handle most cooking and cleaning while he focused on his studies and job search. Family discussions about my future became dominated by Robert and Marcus's preferences rather than my interests. They pushed me toward practical majors and career paths, dismissing my creative inclinations as unrealistic hobbies. The art supplies Mom had left me were eventually moved to the garage, supposedly to make room for Marcus's business textbooks and computer equipment. When I completed my associate degree and prepared to transfer to Portland State, Robert delivered devastating news. The education fund had suffered significant losses due to market volatility and poor investment performance. Instead of the $150,000 Mom had saved, only about $30,000 remained available for my university education. The revelation shocked me completely. I demanded to see detailed financial records, but Robert provided only summary statements showing various investment losses and management fees. He seemed genuinely distressed about the situation, apologizing repeatedly and promising to explore every option for maximizing my remaining educational resources. "Your mother would be heartbroken," he said, his voice filled with apparent regret. "I thought I was protecting her hard work, but the market has been brutal. We'll figure this out together, but university might need to be postponed until we can rebuild your fund." Marcus was less sympathetic. "Maybe this is a sign that you should be more realistic about your goals," he suggested. "Plenty of people succeed without expensive degrees. You could work full-time and take night classes, prove your commitment to education through effort rather than just spending money." The news devastated me, but I felt trapped by circumstances and grateful that Robert was still supporting me despite the financial disappointment. I postponed university plans again, increased my work hours, and began paying more household expenses to contribute to the family budget. Robert praised my maturity and resilience, while Marcus grudgingly acknowledged my increased contributions. Over the following months, I noticed inconsistencies in Robert's explanations about the fund losses. When I asked specific questions about which investments had failed, his answers were vague and sometimes contradictory. He became defensive when pressed for details, suggesting that my lack of financial sophistication made the explanations difficult to understand. My suspicions grew when I overheard a phone conversation between Robert and Marcus about business opportunities. They discussed a potential partnership in Marcus's friend's construction company, mentioning significant startup capital that seemed inconsistent with our supposedly strained finances. When I asked about this conversation, both men denied any knowledge of new business ventures. One evening, while Robert was traveling for work and Marcus was out with friends, I searched his home office for financial documents, hidden in a locked drawer. I found records showing transfers from my education fund to various business investments and personal accounts. The systematic theft had been occurring for over 2 years, disguised as legitimate investment activities. The documentation revealed that Robert had used my inheritance as startup capital for multiple business ventures, including the construction partnership with Marcus's friend. My education fund had been completely diverted to investments that primarily benefited Robert and Marcus, with any returns flowing into their personal accounts rather than back to my educational resources. Confronting Robert about the theft led to an explosive argument. He initially denied any wrongdoing, then shifted to justifying his actions as necessary investments for the family's financial security. "You're part of this family," he shouted. "These investments benefit everyone, including your future. You're being selfish and ungrateful after everything I've done for you. Marcus supported his father completely, accusing me of being paranoid and greedy. Dad saved you from being alone and homeless, he said coldly. Now you're attacking him over money management decisions you don't understand. Maybe it's time you learn to take care of yourself instead of depending on handouts. The hostile confrontation made clear that I had no allies in this household and no legal recourse without expensive attorney representation I couldn't afford. Robert controlled all the documentation and had legal authority over my finances until age 25. Challenging his management would require resources and expertise I simply didn't possess as a 20-year-old community college student. Rather than escalating the conflict immediately, I began secretly documenting the financial irregularities while planning my exit strategy. I opened a separate bank account at a different institution, began working additional hours, and researched legal aid resources. My priority was escaping the household safely while gathering evidence of the financial theft. The atmosphere at home became increasingly toxic after our confrontation. Robert monitored my activities closely, questioning my whereabouts and limiting my access to financial documents. Marcus openly expressed resentment about my continued presence, suggesting that I should move out and support myself independently, rather than causing family discord. When I announced my intention to move out and pursue university education independently, Robert threatened to block access to any remaining education funds until I reached 25. You can leave if you want, he said coldly, but don't expect any financial support for your ingratitude. See how far you get trying to pay for college with restaurant wages? At 21, I left the house I had shared with Mom, carrying only personal belongings and the small savings I had accumulated secretly. I had nowhere to go and no family support, but staying in that environment was no longer tolerable. I was determined to pursue my education independently, regardless of the obstacles. My first night of homelessness was spent in my car in a 24-hour diner parking lot. The reality of my situation hit hard as I tried to sleep in the cramped vehicle, surrounded by my few possessions. I had a part-time job at a local restaurant, but the wages barely covered basic survival needs, let alone housing and education expenses. I developed a routine that allowed me to maintain appearances while living in my car. I purchased a gym membership for shower access, rotated between different parking locations to avoid detection, and used public libraries for internet access and study space. The physical discomfort was challenging, but the social isolation was worse. Within 2 weeks of leaving Robert's house, I had added a second job at a grocery store, working overnight stocking shifts that paid slightly better than my restaurant position. The overnight schedule actually suited my living situation, as I could sleep during the day when parking was less conspicuous and use the overnight hours productively for work. I enrolled in a single community college class per semester, the maximum I could afford while maintaining full-time work hours. My academic progress slowed dramatically, but I was determined to continue my education despite the circumstances. The campus provided a safe space during the day, with study areas and restrooms that allowed me to maintain basic hygiene and dignity. Finding safe sleeping locations became a constant concern. I rotated between several overnight parking areas, 24-hour businesses, residential streets with minimal traffic, and occasionally hospital parking lots where overnight parking was common. Each location had advantages and risks, requiring constant vigilance to avoid detection or danger. The physical toll of living in my car was significant. Chronic back pain from sleeping in cramped positions, poor nutrition due to limited food, storage and preparation options, and constant fatigue from irregular sleep patterns. I lost weight rapidly and developed frequent headaches from stress and inadequate rest. After 3 months of this lifestyle, I added a third part-time job working weekend shifts at a retail store. The additional income allowed me to occasionally rent motel rooms for proper sleep and shower facilities, but these were expensive luxuries I could rarely afford. Most nights, I endured the discomfort and insecurity of car living. My academic performance suffered despite my determination to succeed. Exhaustion made concentration difficult, and irregular schedules prevented consistent study habits. Professors noticed my declining engagement, but I couldn't explain my circumstances without risking unwanted intervention or pity. I maintained the facade of a struggling but managing student. The emotional impact was perhaps worse than the physical hardships. Constant anxiety about safety, hygiene, and discovery created a state of hypervigilance that was mentally exhausting. I had no one to confide in about my situation, maintaining complete isolation to protect my dignity and avoid uncomfortable questions about my circumstances. Winter brought new challenges as Oregon's rainy season made car living even more difficult. Moisture accumulated inside the vehicle, creating unhealthy conditions and ruining some of my belongings. Cold temperatures made sleep nearly impossible without running the engine for heat, which consumed precious gasoline and risked carbon monoxide. Poisoning. I researched local shelters and assistance programs, but most had waiting lists or requirements I couldn't meet. Youth services focused on minors, while adult programs primarily served individuals with substance abuse issues or mental illness. I fell into a gap between services, too old for youth programs but not fitting the typical homeless demographic. Restaurant and retail jobs provided some social interaction, but I carefully maintained emotional distance from coworkers. Several people expressed concern about my appearance or unusual availability for difficult shifts, but I deflected questions with vague explanations about financial challenges and family issues. The grocery store overnight position became my primary source of stability. The work was physically demanding but provided steady income and a warm, safe environment during the most dangerous nighttime hours. My supervisor appreciated my reliability and strong work ethic, never suspecting the desperate circumstances driving my dedication. During this period, I lost touch with most college friends, unable to maintain relationships while hiding my living situation. Social activities required money I couldn't spare and explanations I couldn't provide. My isolation deepened as I focused entirely on survival and maintaining basic functionality. 8 months into my homelessness, I had established a sustainable but miserable routine. 3 part-time jobs provided barely adequate income. 1 community college class per semester maintained educational progress, and a complex system of locations and schedules kept me housed in my increasingly unreliable car. It was survival, not living. The revelation came at 2:30 a.m. on a Tuesday night while I was stocking produce at the grocery store. I had worked a double shift after my car wouldn't start that morning, forcing me to remain at work rather than risk missing hours I desperately needed. Exhaustion made every movement difficult, and I was barely functioning on autopilot. A voice behind me said, "Emily? Emily Thompson?" I turned to find a well-dressed woman in her 50s, her expression shocked and concerned. It took me a moment to recognize Margaret, my mother's older sister, whom I hadn't seen since Mom's funeral. Aunt Margaret lived in Seattle, where she owned a successful marketing consulting firm. She and Mom had maintained contact despite geographic distance, but Margaret's demanding career and frequent business travel had limited family visits. She had sent flowers and a beautiful sympathy card after Mom died, but we had lost touch during my turbulent transition into Robert's household. "What are you doing here at this hour?" Margaret asked, her voice filled with concern. I quickly explained that I worked overnight shifts to pay for school, trying to sound positive about my circumstances. But Margaret's sharp eyes took in my obvious exhaustion, my too thin frame, and my worn-out clothing. "Where are you living now?" she asked directly. "Are you still with that man your mother married?" The question caught me off guard, and my careful composure cracked slightly. Margaret noticed immediately, her expression growing more concerned. "I need to get back to work," I said, deflecting her questions. "My supervisor is strict about socializing during shifts." But Margaret was persistent, asking for my phone number and insisting we meet for coffee when my shift ended. At 7 a.m., Margaret waited in the store's parking lot, having purchased coffee and pastries for both of us. In the harsh morning light, I'm sure I looked even worse than I had under the store's fluorescent lighting. Margaret's shock was evident as she took in my appearance. Over coffee in her rental car, the entire story poured out. The marriage to Robert, the theft of my education fund, my homelessness, and my desperate struggle to survive while continuing my education. Margaret listened without interrupting, her expression growing darker with each revelation. "That bastard," she finally said, her usual professional composure completely abandoned. "He targeted you when you were most vulnerable and stole your inheritance, and I had no idea you were going through this alone." Her voice broke slightly. "Sarah would be horrified to know what happened to you after she died." Margaret's immediate response was decisive and overwhelming. She insisted I come with her to her hotel room immediately, where I could shower, sleep, and eat properly while she made phone calls to address my situation. When I protested that I couldn't miss work, she offered to call my employers and explain. A family emergency. You're not living in your car for another single night, she said firmly. I don't care what it takes or costs. We're going to fix this mess and get your life back on track. Your mother was my baby sister, and I should have checked on you years ago. The hotel room felt like paradise after months of car living. A real bathroom with unlimited hot water, a comfortable bed, and room service that delivered the first substantial meal I'd eaten in weeks. Margaret insisted I rest while she made a series of phone calls, including one to her attorney in Seattle. When I woke up 8 hours later, Margaret had already begun organizing my rescue. Her attorney had researched Washington state laws regarding financial abuse and mismanagement of estates. A private investigator was being hired to document Robert's theft of my inheritance. Margaret had also contacted a Portland attorney specializing in financial fraud cases. We're going to destroy him, Margaret said matter-of-factly. What Robert did was theft, pure and simple. He took advantage of a grieving teenager and stole her mother's legacy. The legal system will not look kindly on his actions, especially given the power dynamic and your age when the theft began. The next several days were a whirlwind of legal meetings, document gathering, and planning. Margaret extended her Portland stay, moving us to a furnished apartment she rented for a month while legal proceedings began. She insisted on covering all expenses, including replacing my worn-out clothing and shoes. The evidence against Robert was overwhelming. Bank records showed systematic transfers from my education fund to his personal accounts and business investments. The returns from these investments had been kept rather than reinvested in my education. Margaret's attorney estimated the total theft at over $180,000, including lost investment growth. Robert's initial response to legal notification was aggressive. Denial and counter-accusations. He claimed I was mentally unstable and being manipulated by my aunt for financial gain. He threatened to file restraining orders and accused Margaret of interfering in family matters she didn't understand. The legal proceedings moved quickly once evidence was presented. Robert's attorney, faced with clear documentation of financial theft, advised settling rather than facing criminal charges. The negotiation process was brutal but ultimately successful, resulting in full restitution plus interest and penalties. Margaret supported me completely throughout the legal battle, covering attorney fees and living expenses while the case proceeded. She also arranged for me to enroll at Portland State University for the spring semester, with tuition covered by her personal accounts until my settlement came through. The settlement amount was substantial enough to cover my remaining undergraduate, education plus graduate school if desired. Additionally, Robert was required to pay Margaret's legal fees and penalties for the financial abuse. He also faced professional consequences, losing his social work license and facing criminal probation. Marcus, who had benefited significantly from the stolen money, was required to return assets purchased with my inheritance, including his truck and business investments. His attitude toward me shifted from hostility to desperate attempts at reconciliation, but the damage to any potential relationship was irreversible. The legal resolution provided not just financial restitution, but psychological validation. Years of gaslighting and manipulation had made me question my own perceptions and worth. The court's recognition of the abuse helped restore my sense of reality and self-respect. Margaret invited me to move to Seattle and live with her while completing my education. Her spacious condominium had a guest suite that became my sanctuary, decorated with some of Mom's artwork that Margaret had preserved over the years. Being surrounded by familiar colors and creativity helped heal emotional wounds I hadn't even recognized. Under Margaret's guidance, I changed my major to graphic design with a business minor, finally pursuing the artistic path Mom had always encouraged. My academic performance improved dramatically once I had stable housing, proper nutrition, and emotional support. Professors commented on my renewed creativity and engagement. The relationship with Margaret filled a void I hadn't realized still existed. She shared stories about Mom's childhood and young adulthood that helped me understand my mother more completely. Through Margaret's memories, I gained a fuller picture of Mom's dreams and ambitions, many of which reflected my own interests and values. Margaret also became a mentor in professional development, introducing me to clients and colleagues in the design industry. Her business connections provided internship opportunities and networking experiences that would have been impossible otherwise. She invested in my future the way Mom would have done. The transformation from desperate survival to stable success took time and patience. Even with financial security restored and comfortable housing provided, I struggled with anxiety and hypervigilance developed during my homeless period. Margaret arranged for therapy sessions with a counselor specializing in trauma and abuse recovery. Dr. Jennifer Wong helped me process the complex trauma of losing my mother, being betrayed by trusted authority figures, and surviving months of homelessness. She helped me understand that my survival strategies had been adaptive and intelligent, not character flaws or weaknesses. The shame I felt about accepting help gradually transformed into gratitude and self-compassion. Through therapy, I also learned to recognize the signs of manipulation and abuse that had made Robert's theft possible. Understanding the psychological tactics used against me helped prevent future exploitation and restored confidence in my own judgment and intuition. My academic success at Portland State exceeded everyone's expectations, including my own. The combination of natural artistic ability, business acumen learned through adversity, and fierce determination created a powerful foundation for professional success. I graduated summa cum laude with multiple job offers from prestigious design firms. Margaret offered me a position at her consulting company, but encouraged me to explore other opportunities first to gain diverse experience. I accepted a position with a nonprofit organization specializing in youth services, designing marketing materials and educational resources for vulnerable teenagers. Working with at-risk youth provided meaningful purpose and helped transform my traumatic experiences into tools for helping others. I could recognize signs of financial abuse, family manipulation, and housing insecurity that other staff members might miss. My personal experience provided credibility and empathy that enhanced my professional effectiveness. 5 years after Margaret found me stocking shelves in the middle of the night, my life has transformed completely. I own a beautiful apartment filled with Mom's artwork and my own creative projects. I have a fulfilling career that combines artistic expression with social impact. Most importantly, I have a loving family relationship with Margaret that honors Mom's memory while building new traditions. The financial settlement not only restored my education fund but provided enough additional resources to establish investment, accounts, and emergency savings. Margaret taught me financial management skills, ensuring I would never again be vulnerable to theft or manipulation. I now understand money as a tool for security and generosity, rather than a source of anxiety. My relationship with creativity has been completely renewed. The artistic supplies and interests that Robert and Marcus dismissed as impractical have become the foundation of both my career and personal fulfillment. I honor Mom's legacy by pursuing the creative path she encouraged, while also developing the business skills necessary for professional success. Robert and Marcus have both faced ongoing consequences for their actions. Robert's criminal record and professional sanctions have limited his career opportunities, while Marcus struggled to repay his portion of the settlement. I feel no satisfaction in their difficulties, only relief that they can no longer harm me or anyone else in similar situations. The experience taught me profound lessons about resilience, family, and the power of speaking truth. I learned that family is defined by love and support, rather than legal relationships or biological connections. Margaret became more family to me than Robert ever was, despite his legal status as my stepfather. I also learned that asking for help is not weakness, but wisdom. Margaret's intervention saved my life and restored my future, but it only became possible when I was honest about my circumstances. Pride and shame had kept me isolated and suffering unnecessarily, while honesty and vulnerability opened doors to rescue and recovery. Perhaps most importantly, I learned that survival is not the same as living. During my homeless period, I focused so intensely on basic survival that I lost sight of dreams, relationships, and joy. Recovery meant not just restoring stability, but rediscovering purpose, creativity, and connection with others. Today, I work with homeless youth through my nonprofit position, helping them navigate systems and resources while pursuing education and career goals. I share appropriate parts of my story when it might help someone else recognize they are not alone or hopeless. Sometimes a single conversation can plant seeds of hope that grow into transformed lives. I also volunteer with legal aid organizations helping young adults understand their rights regarding financial abuse and estate theft. Many people don't realize that financial manipulation by family members is illegal and actionable. Raising awareness and providing resources can prevent others from suffering similar exploitation. My relationship with Margaret continues to deepen and evolve. She has become not just my aunt, but my closest friend, advisor, and chosen family. We have dinner together every Sunday, sharing a tradition that honors both Mom's memory and our own bond. Margaret has taught me that love can indeed create family connections stronger than blood relationships. The ripple effects of that midnight encounter at the grocery store continue expanding through my life and the lives of others I've been able to help. Margaret's decision to investigate my circumstances rather than accepting surface explanations created possibilities I never could have imagined during my darkest nights sleeping in my car. If you're currently facing impossible circumstances, please remember that situations can change dramatically through unexpected connections and conversations. The person who might help you could be someone from your past or someone you haven't met yet. The strength you need might come from sources you haven't yet recognized or considered. Your story is still being written, and chapters you can't yet imagine might be waiting just ahead. Sometimes the darkest periods precede the most beautiful transformations. Keep moving forward, one day at a time, because you never know when help might arrive or opportunities might appear. Have you ever experienced a moment when a chance encounter changed everything? Or have you been the person who noticed someone else's struggle and offered help? Share your experiences in the comments below, because your story might provide exactly the encouragement someone else needs today. Thank you for listening to my journey from desperation to hope. Remember that your current circumstances do not define your ultimate destiny, and tomorrow might bring possibilities you cannot imagine today.